So, there I was again, staring at myself in the mirror. The makeup never felt right, but what choice did I have? I'm a party clown. That's my job. Some people put on suits and ties to go to work. I paint on a smile. I force it, stretch my mouth up with my fingers, even though all I want to do is scream. Maybe it always was. After slapping on the makeup, I went out to the streets. The sign in my hands, dancing around like I was promoting a circus or something. And then, out of nowhere, a group of kids decided to take it. They laughed as they ran, but it wasn't funny to me. I chased after them, as if catching them would somehow stop everything wrong with the world. When I finally caught up, they were waiting in an alley. They smashed the sign over my head, and I went down. As I hit the ground, I realized that's my life. Always chasing, always falling, always getting kicked when I'm down. It's like the universe was telling me something. Maybe the real joke was me. Afterward, I had to face the therapist again. She asked me if I was working on my journal. I handed it over. Funny thing is, I was supposed to use it as a journal, but it became more of a joke diary. I've always wanted to be a stand-up comedian, you see. But no one's laughing. Not really. She flipped through the pages and stopped when she read, I just hope my death makes more sense than my life. It's funny, isn't it? We're all just trying to find meaning, but what if the meaning comes only when it's too late? When I told her I felt better in the hospital, she didn't understand. Locked up, safe from the outside world, I didn't have to pretend anymore. The world didn't expect anything from me, and I didn't expect anything from it. She didn't seem to care when I asked for more meds. 7 pills aren't enough to numb the noise in my head. But that's the thing with people like her, they listen because they're paid to, not because they care. The bus ride home was typical. A kid stared at me, so I made a funny face. That's what I do, right? Make people laugh. But his mother scolded me like I was some kind of freak. Then came the laugh I can't control. I handed her a card explaining my condition, but she just rolled her eyes. People never understand. They see the laugh, but they don't see the pain behind it. That's the thing, though. They expect you to behave as if you're not breaking inside, as if pretending to be okay will make everything better. But it doesn't. Back home, it's just me and Mom. Penny Fleck. She used to work for Thomas Wayne, and she still writes letters to him. She thinks he'll help us, but I know better. Wayne's just like everyone else in this city, too busy to care about people like us. She always asks if he's replied, and I lie, telling her he's just busy. It's easier that way. I help her with her food, and we sit down to watch the Murray Franklin show. Murray Franklin, he's a star. A man people actually listen to. I start to imagine myself on the show. He calls me down from the audience, shakes my hand, tells me he respects me for taking care of my mother. It's all so perfect in my head, a world where someone finally sees me. In the fantasy, Murray says he'd give up everything to have a kid like me, and then we hug. It's funny, really. Even in my dreams, all I want is for someone to tell me I'm worth something. I've spent so much time waiting for the world to give me a reason to feel like I belong. That's the thing about longing for recognition, it consumes you. You start to shape your life around the approval of others. In my case, it was the idea that Murray Franklin or someone like him could finally acknowledge me. But the truth is, the world doesn't care. No one's going to hand you a stage. And when you realize that, something in you snaps. The next day at work, Randall, one of my coworkers, handed me a gun. He said I needed protection after what happened with those kids. I didn't want to take it at first, but then again, I'm tired of being defenseless. Another coworker, Gary, interrupted, saying the boss was looking for me. Turns out, I was in trouble again, this time for losing the sign. I tried to explain that it was stolen, but no one ever believes me. It's like they see me as a joke. My boss didn't care, he said he'd take the cost out of my paycheck. I just stood there, smiling through it all, but inside, I wanted to scream. When I got outside, I kicked a trash can, hoping the pain in my foot would drown out the pain in my head. That evening, I shared an elevator ride with my neighbor, Sophie Demond, and her daughter. When the elevator briefly stalled, Sophie, frustrated with living in a rundown building, mimicked a gun with her hand and pretended to shoot herself. I found her gesture amusing, so I did the same as we exited the elevator. For the first time in a while, I felt connected to someone. But those moments are fleeting, aren't they? Back home, I gave Mom a bath. She asked me about Wayne again, saying he's a good man who wouldn't want us living like this. I didn't have the heart to tell her that no one cares. Instead, I told her not to worry because my stand-up routine would make it to the big club soon. She looked at me, unconvinced, and said, "I thought you had to be funny to be a comedian." It stung, but I'm used to it by now. That night, after putting her to bed, I practiced with my new gun. I imagined myself in control for once. The TV played some music, and I started to dance, just me and the gun. But then, I accidentally pulled the trigger and shot a hole in the wall. Mom woke up, asking about the noise. I told her it was just a war movie. She believed me. She always believes the lies. The next day, I followed Sophie around town. She didn't seem to notice. I guess I just wanted to be close to someone. It felt good. Later, I went to a stand-up show to take some notes. Comedy is hard, you know? People expect you to laugh through the pain, but they don't realize how much it hurts. I wrote something in my journal that night. The worst part of having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't. Later, Sophie knocked on my door. She asked if I'd been following her. I admitted it. She laughed. It was nice. She told me I was funny, and that was enough for me. I invited her to my stand-up show, and she accepted. For the first time in a while, I felt like someone saw me. Maybe this was the beginning of something good. The next day, I was working at a hospital, performing as a clown for some kids. I like kids, they don't judge you the way adults do. But then, in the middle of my performance, the gun fell out of my pocket. It hit the floor, and everything stopped. I panicked and quickly picked it up, telling the kids it was a prop. They didn't know any better, but I knew I was in trouble. That night, my boss called. He was furious about the gun, and I tried to lie my way out of it, telling him it was just part of the act. But he didn't believe me. Why would he? No one ever does. He said Randall told him I tried to buy a gun off him. I was fired. The anger bubbled up inside me again. After hanging up, I smashed my head against the glass of the phone booth. For a moment, the pain was physical, not emotional. It felt better that way. Afterward, I took the subway home. It was late, and the car was mostly empty, except for 3 guys in suits. They were drunk, bothering a woman sitting nearby. I couldn't help it, the laugh came out. I tried to hold it back, but you can't stop what's already inside you. The woman left, and the men turned their attention to me. One of them started singing "Send in the Clowns" as they came closer. They grabbed my stuff, took off my wig, and started pushing me around, laughing at my expense. But this time, something was different. This time, I didn't just take it. I pulled out the gun and shot 2 of them, right there on the subway. The third ran off, but I followed him. It wasn't about getting my things back anymore. It was about the power. For once, I wasn't the victim. I shot him on the stairs, and when the ringing in my ears started to fade, I realized what I had done. I ran. I ran fast, trying to escape what I had just become. I made it to a public bathroom, locked myself inside, and stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. Then, slowly, I started to move. I danced. The fear and adrenaline melted away as I danced, twisting my body to the rhythm only I could hear. That was when I knew I wasn't Arthur Fleck anymore. Arthur was weak. But the Joker was strong. I had found myself, and it felt good. It's strange, isn't it? I feel alive. There's something primal about it. As if society wants you to conform, to play nice, but the moment you do, you become invisible. I had been invisible for too long. That night, I knocked on Sophie's door. She opened it, and without a word, I kissed her. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. The next day, I went to work to collect my things. As I walked through the building, I overheard my coworkers talking about the subway murders. The news was buzzing with reports of a clown who shot 3 men. But they didn't know it was me. Randall even tried to offer me sympathy, but I could see through his lies. He was a hypocrite, pretending to care. So I told them. It was my gun that killed those men. The look on their faces, fear, shock, it was the first time anyone had truly seen me. Before I left, I smashed the punch clock, sending it crashing to the ground. The sign on the wall that said, "Don't forget to smile," caught my eye. I crossed out 2 words, leaving it to read, "Don't smile." Why should I? Why should anyone? This world isn't a happy place. It's a place where people like me are forgotten, ignored, until we do something drastic. Back at the apartment, I took my last few pills and sat down to watch TV with Mom. Thomas Wayne was on the news, talking about the murders. He called the killer a coward, hiding behind a clown mask. He said people like me, people who do nothing with their lives, are clowns. I guess that's how the rich see the rest of us, as jokes. I watched as Wayne talked about running for mayor, saying he could fix the city. But I knew better. People like him don't fix things, they only make them worse. A few days later, I had my final therapy session. The city was cutting the funding, and my therapist told me this would be our last meeting. I tried to tell her I was finally starting to feel notice, that for the first time in my life, people were paying attention to me. But she didn't care. She just apologized and said there was nothing more she could do for me. That's the thing about this world, when you need help the most, that's when people abandon you. Later that night, I was at a bar, waiting for my turn to perform my stand-up routine. Sophie was in the audience, watching. But when I got on stage, something happened. The laughter started again, uncontrollable, unstoppable. The jokes I had written fell flat. No one laughed with me, they just stared. When it was over, Sophie and I left together, and as we walked, I noticed the newspapers had started to print stories about the clown who killed those men. They even had sketches of a clown face. Sophie told me the clown was a hero. For the first time, I felt proud. People were talking about me, about what I did. And they were calling me a hero. Me, Arthur Fleck, the man no one ever noticed. But now, I was someone. And it felt good. Later that night, I found Mom asleep in front of the TV. I woke her up and sent her to bed. Before she went, she mentioned she had written a new letter to Thomas Wayne. She still believed he would help us. After she was in her room, I took the letter and read it. That's when I learned the truth. Thomas Wayne was my father. I couldn't believe it. All these years, Mom had told me we were nobody, that we didn't matter. But now, I knew the truth. I was Wayne's son, and he had abandoned us. I confronted Mom, and she tried to explain, saying they were in love, but she had to keep quiet because of appearances. She locked herself in the bathroom, terrified of me. And she should be. She lied to me my whole life. The next day, I went to Wayne Manor. I wanted to see him, to talk to him. But instead, I met his son, Bruce. He was just a kid, playing in the garden. I performed a little magic for him, trying to make him smile, but he wasn't impressed. I asked his name, and when he didn't respond, I reached through the gate and forced his mouth into a smile. That's what the Waynes did to me, after all, forced me to smile through a life they had created. Suddenly, a man I later learned was Alfred came out and threatened to call the police. I told him I was Penny's son and that I needed to see Mr. Wayne. But Alfred laughed at me. He said my mother was delusional, that she had made the whole thing up. I snapped. I reached through the gate and tried to choke him. But when I saw Bruce standing there, I let go. That evening, I came home to find paramedics taking Mom to the hospital. She had a stroke. I went with her, but while I was waiting outside, 2 cops approached me. They had been talking to Mom when she collapsed, and now they wanted to ask me about the subway murders. I told them my gun was just a prop. I don't think they believed me, but I didn't care anymore. Sophie was waiting for me in the hospital room, keeping me company. But even that didn't make me feel better. This world, this city, it chews people up and spits them out. People like me, people like my mother, were just clowns to them, something to laugh at. Saw something that broke me even more. The Murray Franklin show, the one thing I used to dream about, was mocking me. There, on the screen, was a clip of my stand-up routine, and Murray was laughing at me, Arthur Fleck, the man who once wanted nothing more than to be on that show. Murray, the man I admired, had turned me into a joke. The world had done it to me my entire life, and now even Murray had joined in. Something inside me snapped at that moment. I wasn't laughing anymore. Back at home, I sat in the dark, watching the news. People in the streets were rioting, wearing clown masks because Wayne had called them clowns. They were fighting back against the rich, and I was their symbol. The murders on the subway had sparked something, and people were starting to notice. They were noticing me. Maybe they didn't know my name, but they were seeing what I had done, and they were following. I mattered. I decided to join the protests, blending in with the masked crowd. The chaos in the streets was beautiful, cops fighting with protesters, people tearing the city apart. I snuck into a movie theater where Thomas Wayne was watching a film, blending in with the workers. As I watched him from the shadows, I realized something. This man, this city's so-called savior, was no better than the rest. He was just as corrupt, just as cruel as everyone else who had stepped on people like me. When he left the theater, I followed him into the bathroom. I confronted him, told him I knew the truth, that I was his son. But he just laughed in my face, saying my mother was delusional. He denied everything, and that's when I lost it. The laugh came out, uncontrollable, as it always does when things get too overwhelming. Wayne punched me in the face, but it wasn't just my face that hurt, it was the realization that even the man I thought could be my father didn't care about me. No one did. When I got home, I shut everything out. I ignored the calls from the cops and locked myself inside the refrigerator, shutting the door on the world that had rejected me for the last time. It was cold and dark in there, but at least it was quiet. At least I didn't have to pretend anymore. The next day, everything changed. I got a call from the Murray Franklin show. They wanted me on the show, the same show that had laughed at me, the same show that had humiliated me in front of everyone. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't Arthur Fleck, the man who wanted to be accepted. I was Joker. And I was going to make sure everyone knew it. Afterward, I went to Arkham State Hospital to get answers. I needed to see my mother's file. The clerk wasn't going to give it to me, so I stole it. I ran out of there with the truth in my hands and hid it in the stairwell to read it. That's when I saw the truth. I was adopted. My whole life was a lie. Mom had made up everything. Wayne wasn't my father. She had raised me with an abusive boyfriend who had hurt me, and she had done nothing to stop it. She had lied to me, betrayed me. As my mind continued to unravel, I found myself at Sophie's apartment, thinking we had this romantic connection. But when she saw me standing in her living room, her expression was one of pure fear and confusion. She asked me to leave, and in that moment, everything became clear. I realized there was never any relationship between us. Everything I thought we shared, every date, every conversation, was nothing but a figment of my imagination. The truth hit me hard. I had been completely alone all along, lost in my own delusions. I went home that night, and I knew what I had to do. I visited Mom in the hospital. She had done so much damage, caused so much pain. As I stood by her bedside, I leaned in close and whispered, "My life isn't a tragedy, it's a comedy." Then, I suffocated her with a pillow, ending the lie once and for all. I didn't feel sadness or regret. I felt free. I wasn't Arthur anymore. Arthur was dead. I was the Joker. After Mom was gone, I went back to my apartment to get ready for the show. I dyed my hair green, put on my makeup, and dressed in the brightest suit I could find. The Joker had arrived, and the world was going to see me for who I really was. I was interrupted by the doorbell. It was Randall and Gary, stopping by to check on me after hearing about Mom's death. But I knew what Randall was really worried about. The cops were looking into the subway murders, and he was scared. Randall had betrayed me, just like everyone else. So I did what had to be done. I grabbed the scissors I had hidden in my pants and stabbed him over and over again. Gary, the only one who had ever been nice to me, stood frozen in terror. I let him go because he didn't deserve to be hurt. He wasn't like the others. After Randall was dead, I felt calm. I felt right. With my transformation complete, I left for the Murray Franklin show. The cops saw me on the street and started chasing me, but I didn't care. I ran into the subway, which was filled with people wearing clown masks, riding against the city's elite. They were fighting for what they believed in, and I was their symbol. I caused a fight to break out, and in the confusion, one of the cops shot a civilian. The crowd turned on them, and I slipped away, free to continue my journey. When I got to the studio, I waited in the dressing room, preparing for my big moment. Murray came in to check on me, asking me to keep the show clean. I agreed, but I had no intention of playing by the rules. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know who I had become. I told him to introduce me as Joker. That's who I was now. That's who I always had been. When they called my name, I danced onto the stage, feeling the eyes of the audience on me. For the first time, people were paying attention. I kissed one of the guests, sat down, and reassured everyone that my makeup wasn't political. But that wasn't why I was there. I had something to say, something the world needed to hear. I admitted to the subway murders. I wasn't ashamed. I had nothing left to lose. As I spoke, I could feel the power in my words. I told them about the system, about how it fails people like me every day. How people like Murray only bring us on their show to make fun of us, to laugh at our pain. But I wasn't the joke anymore. I was in control. And then, I did what I had planned all along. I shot Murray in the head, right there on live television. The cameras cut out, but it didn't matter. The message had already been sent. The city had already been on the edge, but in that moment, it exploded into pure anarchy. As I left the studio, I could hear the sirens, the shouts, the sounds of glass breaking, and the roar of the streets being overtaken by the people. Gotham was burning, and I was at the center of it all. They arrested me and threw me in the back of a police car. As we drove through the city, I watched through the window as mobs in clown masks rampaged through the streets, tearing everything apart. It was surreal, this chaos, this destruction, it was because of me. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't invisible, like I actually mattered. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a stolen ambulance slammed into the side of the car, flipping it over. Everything went black for a moment. When I came to, I was being pulled from the wreckage by a group of rioters. They were cheering for me, lifting me up like some kind of hero, their symbol of rebellion. They laid me on the hood of the car, and when I stood up, bloody and bruised, I looked out at them, all those people, all those clowns, and they were all cheering for me. For me! I started to dance, moving with the energy that filled the air, the chaos that I had created. The city was burning around me, and I had never felt more alive. Later, they took me to Arkham. I sat there, talking to some doctor. She asked me questions, but I wasn't really listening. I couldn't stop thinking about how funny it all was. When she asked me what was so amusing, I just laughed and said, "You wouldn't get it." Then, as I walked down the hallway of that asylum, leaving a trail of bloody footprints behind me, I was still laughing. Everything had finally fallen into place. I was no longer Arthur. I was something more. I was the Joker. The world created me. The people who laughed at me, ignored me, pushed me down, they're the reason I became who I am. You can only push someone so far before they push back. And when they do, they don't just push back, they explode. The Joker isn't just me. The Joker is every person society has ever forgotten, every voice that was silenced. So tell me, what would you do when the world stops caring? Well, that's it for now. You know, the world's a funny place. One click, one like, one subscribe, that's all it takes to keep things interesting. So why don't you go ahead? Click that button, show me you're paying attention. And who knows? Maybe the next video will be the one that really speaks to you. I'll see you there.